All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar on building collective power, partnering for immigrant justice. Today's webinar brings together advocates, organizers, service providers, and community leaders who share a common purpose of advancing the dignity, safety, and opportunity for immigrant communities. Um, at a time when the communities that we're working with continue to face systemic barriers and evolving challenges, the need for collaboration has never been more urgent, and that's what we're here to talk about today. This session will, sorry, I saw a raised hand. Um, this session will explore what it means to move beyond siloed work and toward meaningful partnership. And we'll hear some lessons from our partners at NorCal Resist. If we could go to the next slide, please. Yeah, so we're super honored to be joined today by Giselle Garcia. Giselle serves as programs director at NorCal Resist, which is a mutual aid organization dedicated to uplifting marginalized community members and creating an organizing home for all. NorCal Resist is the immigration rapid response network for 25 counties in Northern California and is dedicated to strengthening the region's united front of resistance against immigration enforcement action and government abuse inflicted on immigrant neighbors. The network is composed of hundreds of volunteers and various community partner organizations from Sacramento to Oregon who are trained in best practices to observe, document, and triage folks who are detained by ICE into support services, as well as providing pro se assistance for asylum petitions and other motions in an attempt to address the dearth in accessible immigration legal services. NorCal Resist believes that only we can keep each other safe and is dedicated to empowering community efforts to do so. And again, we're very lucky to have Giselle joining us today. And for those of you who I haven't had a chance to meet, my name is Jasmine Kukan. I work with the Center for Immigrant and Refugee Health, and I will be facilitating today's webinar. Next slide, please. All right, so Giselle will walk us through some of the current political landscape for refugees, emerging programs, challenges, and lessons, and areas for collaboration as well. And at the end of today's session, we'll have time for Q&A. But really, today's session is really meant to be a dialogue. So I encourage you all to engage with our presenter. Next slide, please. All right, and just a few quick reminders before we dive in. So this space is for learning, reflection, and shared discussion. We encourage you to actively listen, ask questions, and engage in the session's activities. Due to the Zoom webinar format, please use the raise hand feature if you'd like to speak, and I can unmute you so you can come off mute and talk directly with Giselle. You're also welcome to participate by sharing your thoughts in the chat or submitting questions in the Q&A box, which we'll address towards the end of the webinar. And thank you all again for helping create a respectful and engaging space. And with that, I'm gonna pass it to Giselle.
Thank you so much. And thank you all for being here today. I'm so thankful to share space with all of you. And of course, for the Center for Immigrant and Refugee Health and all of the incredible work that you do. I'm just going to go ahead and share my slides. If anyone has any trouble seeing the slides, please let me know. And so part of our discussion today is going to be about how we can really leverage our collective power to expand our capacity for immigrant justice. And I should probably introduce myself. My name is Giselle Garcia. I'm programs director here with NorCal Resist. And I'm really, again, happy to be here and have these kinds of discussions with you. There will be two prompts where I will open it up so that we can discuss and engage in some really intentional thinking about what challenges we're seeing on the ground and how we can maybe overcome those challenges and barriers. But it's really going to be about overall this discussion how we can grow together, because if we're all here, it's because we all know that we can't do this alone, right? The need is just growing on all fronts. And unfortunately, resources feel like they're dwindling, especially with the tremendous pressure coming from the federal administration. So this is the moment, if not now, when, right? This is the moment for us to really unite and show that united front of resistance to anyone who is against the work we do and against the populations that we work alongside with. But it's also important for us to show this unity and this collective desire to help to those we are helping, right? Because in this moment of more than ever, individuals are expressing a feeling of isolation, alienation, and like people don't really care, right? And so let's come together and really just leverage that. And if you have any questions or feedback, insights based on your experiences, please do feel free to participate. I will do my best to monitor the webinar chat too, but if I miss something, please feel free to interject. So to kind of ground ourselves in this discussion, and of course, I'm speaking to the choir. You are all individuals and organizations that are on the ground and know all of this. But I just wanted to start with a little discussion about what we're seeing right now to just ground why it is that we need to come together as organizations and allies to do this work. Because more than ever, we are facing a period of profound societal repression. And that means that organizations like ours, who are trying to do what we can to meet those gaps, and to help uplift communities and individuals who are being left behind, we are being squeezed beyond maximum capacity. I don't know about you all. I mean, I think I know, but correct me if I'm wrong, but we are exhausted. I don't know, but it feels like we're working around the clock. When there's one, maybe emerging issue that we feel like we've addressed and we have a plan, a new one arises, right? So we're constantly trying to ensure that we're connected with the community so that we can become aware of those needs. But then with knowledge comes the responsibility to act. And so many of us are just constantly trying to come up with new ways to address what is arising. And so a lot of the trends that we're seeing that individuals are expressing that they're facing in this moment are a sense of constant, 24/7 fear, anxiety, confusion. Because it seems like things are rapidly shifting on our fronts. Policy, right? Social culture and norms of how we treat and view people. Limitations and capacities of the organizations people have long relied on for assistance, even governmental benefits, right? Because of the shifts in policies. So individuals are confused. It's hard to keep up, I think, for us as providers, as allies. It's hard for us. Imagine impacted communities who, especially when we're talking about immigrant populations, they're trying to figure out how to navigate this new kind of social structure in our institutions. So they're confused, they're afraid because of all of the different kinds of lines of rhetoric that is going on. The enforcement that we're seeing, immigration enforcement that we're seeing in our region and across the country. And it seems like more and more individuals who have even been in some kind of a protected category, asylum seekers, and TPS, other kinds of statuses, they're now sort of getting the rug pulled out from under their feet. and are facing risk of enforcement action as well. So there's just this constant state of fear. And with that, it really comes from, and it's rooted from this campaign of dehumanization. I wish I could say that the dehumanization of immigrants and minorities in the United States is new. Unfortunately, not. We have a history of it from the inception of this country. However, during this time with advancements in technology and specifically with how information just is being shared so rapidly, it's being created so rapidly through social media networks. This dehumanization rhetoric is just flooding a lot of individuals' phones and TVs. There's our screens, right? And so it becomes like this inescapable network of dehumanization for individuals who unfortunately fit the bill that this administration is looking to target. So not only are we getting misinformation and this vile rhetoric against immigrant community members, but now we're also seeing that translating into behaviors. We've had reports of many immigrant neighbors who have, been putting gas and they've been, verbally assaulted, right? Because they are immigrants and et cetera, right? So most individuals are feeling like there is no safe space for them in this country, but most also fled because they weren't safe in their country. And a lot of that because of a US policy. So individuals are just flooded with emotion and with this feeling of um, there's nowhere to run, right? And that's where that lack of support and resources comes in. It seems like more and more nonprofits are, coming up. Sacramento is one of the cities with the most amount of nonprofits in the country, actually, which is really interesting to think about. And yet, we are increasingly seeing our resources and that we've tapped into historically being limited, right? And not just on a federal level, but even local ones because of threats, right, from the administration. And so because nonprofits and organizations who are trying to fill those gaps are also experiencing this dearth of resources, that is translating to the communities that we try to support. And they're reaching out and often are telling us, I'm calling and calling. I called everyone on the list that I was given and no one called me back. Or when I called, they said, here's a 6-month wait list, or, they just said they can't help me. And that's not to the fault of organizations. I want to say that, but I just want to say that this is what individuals who are in need are facing. And so that it's compounding that sense of desperation and hopelessness when they're going to the resources that, have long been standing in the community and they can't even find help there. Now, this is going to tie to the fear, right? And the policies that are happening right now. NorCal Resist, as you all know, we manage the rapid response hotline in Northern California, spanning from Sacramento to the Oregon border. And so we have been at the front lines of most of the detentions in this region. And one of the biggest patterns that we're seeing when it comes to ICE detention is that they are targeting the breadwinners of the family. And so oftentimes when someone is detained, the family is left behind without their primary financial support. And in instances, we actually had a family in rural Northern California who the father was picked up, and in 2 weeks, the mother was picked up, leaving behind 4 children, the oldest of which had just turned 18, so she is now taking care of her siblings. But imagine the kind of position this older sibling was left under. no job, was about to graduate high school, and now taking care of three younger children. Um, and so this financial hardship, it's really impacting families' access to food, their access to housing. I can't tell you how many individuals who are being, who are facing ICE detention, their families, someone in their family was detained, how they're at risk they are of losing their housing. And so that financial hardship, on top of the fact that many employers are now doubling down on letting go employees who they perceive might be at risk for ICE detention, and whether it's lawful or not, a lot of individuals don't know what their rights are in the workplace, and so they either sign voluntary resignations, so because they're being intimidated at work, or they just don't know. Again, adding layers and layers of more trauma, financial instability, and fear. And then perhaps one of the most heartbreaking of the impacts that we're seeing right now is family separation. Individuals are not only left to battle that trauma of being taken, from their children, of losing their mother, father, sibling, spouse, but then they're navigating that trauma of family separation with having to deal with the financial hardships that come, with the societal dehumanization, with knocking on every nonprofit's door and not being able to get help, right? With just confusion on what do I do? And the psychological effects that we're seeing, it's absolutely gutting. I actually just met with someone this morning who is in the situation and is experiencing, suicidal ideations because of it. So our immigrant community, our immigrant neighbors right now are extremely vulnerable on all fronts. They are subject to a targeted campaign against by the federal government, essentially being hunted down by immigration enforcement agencies and officers. And so it's overwhelming, even given this synopsis. It's overwhelming as, someone looped into an organization that is trying to provide solidarity with our immigrant neighbors. Witnessing that, we can only imagine how overwhelming it is for the people, personally impacted. So what does that mean for us? Do we give up, or do we stay complacent with the kind of protocols we already have? Well, I'm going to say no. We cannot give up. We cannot. Immigrants and those who are impacted, they don't have the luxury of giving up. Neither do we. We have a responsibility to act. And clearly, because we're in this work, we take our responsibility seriously. And so that's when trying to make an assessment of, our regional kinds of network of support in this field looks like, and how we can better leverage, everyone's strengths and weaknesses is vital. Because if the need is so great right now, unfortunately, it is only going to continue to grow in the time being, until we see some kind of meaningful action that shows that we're headed in the opposite direction. But for now, we can only expect growth in food insecurity, growth in housing crisis, absolutely growth in the trauma and the psychological impact that these immigrant neighbors are facing. And I know that many of you participated in the survey saying, what are the trends? What are the needs that we're seeing? And legal support constantly comes up on top, right? And that's going to continue to grow. And so how do we do this? I'm going to mention a few of the programmatic choices that NorCal Resist has made I'll start since the first Trump administration, but really most of this is since the second Trump administration, so a little over a year now, to kind of give examples of how we are trying to assess the moment and respond as quickly as possible. And so here in Sacramento, we have the Sacramento Immigration Court, right, at 650 Capitol Mall, the John Moss building. And, I've been doing immigration advocacy for over a decade now, and I have to say, these courtroom arrests at immigration court and the kind of systematized approach that ICE has taken this last year about conducting those arrests is pretty new. And I think it took a lot of us by a storm and surprised. But on May 22nd of last year, we had the first immigration courtroom arrest here in the Sacramento Immigration Court. Well, we found out about it and immediately we said, what do we do? Okay, so what did we do? By May 23rd, the very next day, we launched our Court Watch program. Started with a spreadsheet. We said, what do we do? Well, let's get a spreadsheet going, list hourly shifts and call upon the community to come and support. And so since the May 23rd, the very next day after the first arrest happened here in Sacramento, we have been at the John Moss building every single day, helping individuals with the check-in system. So essentially, if you check in with us, we are monitoring to make sure that you check out and you are out, without an arrest. If you have been arrested, we trigger the rapid response protocol to try to get some legal assistance down at the ICE office before people are transferred. And so the turnaround time for creating this program was less than 24 hours. And I can tell you in my experience in the nonprofit industry, programs usually take a long time to launch, we have to sit down, we have to plan, we have to curate, we have to find partners. Maybe this isn't the time that we can do that all the time. Maybe sometimes we have to act quickly. And so that was our commitment. And we have still been there at Court Watch. And it is difficult. I'm not going to sit here and say it's easy. We're constantly having to train new volunteers, recruit volunteers, trying to find a way to support community members who help with Court Watch. We had a Court Watch volunteer who was violently beaten outside of the John Moss building. And so it's not easy, but it's an immediate response to an emerging issue, right? And it has helped keep track and a dossier of accountability and transparency against all of these ICE arrests that are happening inside of the John Moss building. And so as the survey that I was reviewing noted, one of the biggest needs that everyone identified during this moment is legal support. And unfortunately, though it is legal support and having someone who is able to take on an individual's case from beginning to end is worth gold these days. We don't have enough accessible legal representation, right? The very few nonprofit organizations that offer legal support to not just immigrants generally, because there are many refugee resettlement agencies and such that have funding for representation and legal services for individuals who have refugee status or certain statuses. However, it's even harder to find organizations who can take on representation of undocumented individuals, those who don't have any kind of status. And so not only do we have already in general limited legal, organizations who can help low bono or pro bono, there's a tiered system, right? So there's like this hierarchy of, accessible services. And so it feels insurmountable. So what did NorCal Resist do? In 2019, we began developing a pro se clinic. Pro se means self-represented. And we started with an asylum clinic because at that time we did have a high rate of individuals coming through the southern border seeking asylum. And so our pro se clinic was developed with many legal partners and organizations who were ready to meet that gap, right? Because in this way, we have individuals who are trained. We have an attorney reviewer looking at every application before it's filed, but it doesn't require an attorney to take on the case, right, on their caseload. And so that way we can come out with 10 to 15 asylum petitions that we're helping individuals draft in one clinic. And they're meeting their deadline, so they're not barred from taking asylum. They're meeting their the things they need to file, whether that's their passports, their birth records, things like that. And so the pro se clinic model has been monumental in assisting individuals from not being barred from certain avenues of relief, like asylum, and assisting them in being able to apply for other forms of assistance that they need. And so we've taken that and expanded the pro se clinic model into other clinics. That includes our recently launched family preparedness plan clinic. So we have people come in, we help them create their caregiver affidavit forms, fill out, all the information that a caregiver would need in the case of, a parent's detention, make the arrangements necessary so that they can have a plan in place in case someone is, unfortunately detained. We also launched a work permit clinic where we help individuals file for their work permits. We help them create a USCIS account, file online, and we do pay the filing fee. We have helped dozens, going on over 100 individuals file their work permits. And that helps facilitate these other hurdles to employment and, of course, financial hardship. And most recently, and something that I'm incredibly proud of NorCal Resist, is we launched our Pro Se Pretermit Clinic. I don't know if anyone has heard of pretermission, but it is a very novel legal strategy that the Department of Homeland Security has been using in immigration courts starting the end of November of last year. And essentially what a pretermission motion is, the ICE attorney will ask the judge to motion for the pretermission of someone's, let's say, asylum petition in court. And so they say, well, we have an agreement with a third party country that says that before someone from Guatemala can ask us for asylum, they have to go to Uganda first. And so we've had this slew of motions being filed, asking to send individuals who are here lawfully seeking and applying for asylum, attending their hearings, asking to cancel their petitions and send them to Uganda, Ecuador, Honduras, countries they're not from, so that they can fight, so that they can go ahead and ask for asylum in those countries. And so the pretermit clinic was created so that we can help individuals file a formal response in opposition to the government wanting to cancel their petitions and send them to another country that they're not from. And we've been able to help individuals that way, where folks from Court Watch who are there at the court, they'll do intakes there and triage them over to us, where we then host the clinics and help individuals. And I think I see something in the chat. Does someone have a question? Okay. Yes.
Yeah. Hi, Giselle. Yeah, I see Pyle has a raised hand. Pyle, please feel free to come off mute and ask your question.
Yes, apologies. Since Giselle was, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Is that correct? Yes. Yeah. Since she was, explaining about the pretermit motion, so I wanted her to complete. Yeah. So I'm a volunteer working for a non-profit. I'm representing Sahas for Cause, and we are working on family preparedness plans under our OVW grant, and just wanted to know, because this is a very novel concept of pro se clinics. How does pro se means basically self-represented, right? So how does um, victims, or people seeking help regarding family preparedness, like get assistance under pro se clinics? How does it operate? So just wanted to have some information on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So a pro se clinic, it really takes on the back end, you want to really develop kind of like a curriculum for a clinic. So for asylum, we worked with attorneys to put together, training on volunteers on how to help someone fill out their asylum petition, for example, right? For a family preparedness plan clinic, right? Maybe consulting with an attorney how to best fill out the caregiver affidavit form. The ILRC has a wonderful packet as well that you can use to help people start filling out the preliminary information that someone would need who is going to take care of, your kids if you're detained. So, what is your kids' doctors' names and phone numbers, insurance, etc. Right? So the idea with the Pro Se Clinic is that as an organization, you want to start developing what you're going to do at that clinic, consult with, hopefully a legal, an attorney who can just give, you advice, recommendations. For asylum petitions, we always have a attorney there the day of the clinic who reviews each petition before we file them. So it's really coming up with a plan to help as many people as possible correctly fill out their petitions, their forms, their applications. And I'm happy to touch base with you on that too, if you want to talk after.
Yes, we are actually preparing family preparedness plans and care giver affidavits, and which are the resources which are provided at the ILRC. And we have been reaching out to communities, uh, communities from the subcontinent region, Asian communities who are basically subject to discrimination and uh, torturous behavior by the ICE. So yeah, so we have been getting a lot of inquiries as well. So potentially we can collaborate and find ways to help more and more communities.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that is key right there, collaborating. If you guys are getting a lot of um, if you guys are getting a lot of responses about, or requests for help with that, that's something. So a clinic setting would be like you have several stations and volunteers or staff who are helping individuals fill out, so you're helping, let's say, 10 people instead of one person, one appointment, right? So you have 10 different preparers who are helping a different family. And so that's how you're able to, kind of help more individuals. And then you have someone who's reviewing. But that's definitely wonderful and really important work, Kyle. Thank you for plugging in. And then I see another question here. How does preterm mission help in their case? So preterm mission is the motion that the government puts in. They are the ones who are asking the judge to essentially cancel the person's petition for asylum, etc. But a response, what we're helping them file is a response to the judge in the court saying, I object to what the government wants to do. Here's why. And so that response is to help the judge hopefully say, okay, I'm denying ICE's request to cancel their asylum and send them to Uganda. And instead, I'm going to allow this person to stay and keep fighting their case here. And so that's why pretermation is really important, because a lot of people before, if they didn't have an attorney to help, file a formal response, they wouldn't file anything. And so a judge didn't have, the respondent's answer on record to base or make a determination, a favorable determination. So this is to help the judge make a decision against ICE. And but it doesn't always even have to be for legal help. So for example, as many of you probably already know, starting today, the qualifications for CalFresh SNAP benefits has changed. And so now asylum seekers, those who have been granted asylum, those who have been granted U visas, VAWAs, T visas, will no longer qualify for SNAP benefits because of federal legislation. And so when we found out about those changes, in within a week, we launched a clinic to help individuals file for CalFresh before April 1st, because at least they could access benefits for about a year until they had to recertify. So it doesn't always have to look, it doesn't always have to be complicated. It's about how can we create, creative settings to help the most amount of people. And we found that this kind of clinic has been really helpful to help more people at once. Of course, it takes volunteers, it takes, everyone on deck to support, but it is absolutely critical right now where we're seeing such a mass critical number of individuals who need help. And so, similar to these clinics, we've actually developed a food distribution kind of system and programs, because we're seeing a huge increase in food insecurity in our communities. And so, what does that look like? NorCal Resist has a weekly food distribution. We also have a monthly one so that weekly one serves between 300 and 400 people. The one that we have every month, we go around different community centers across the city. That one serves between 600 and 700 people. We also have a community meal team. As you all know, in California, last year they passed a law that businesses have to try to ameliorate food waste by, donating their, things that they would otherwise throw away that is in good condition to organizations or other places that, would use them. And so our community meal team canvasses farmers markets, business, reclaims a ton of food that would have otherwise been wasted. And that same day, they'll distribute it to different apartment complexes and neighborhoods in the community that are impacted to make sure that neighbors are getting food. We also have a community table initiative where every time we have an event in an impacted neighborhood, we will have a team that sets up a whole table with food and different kinds of resources, hygiene supplies, so that individuals can also have access to that wherever we are. And I see we have a question here from Almas.
Hi, how are you? Thank you so much, Craig, for bringing all the issue of immigrants. My name is Alma Sideko. I'm the founder and executive director of Global Communication, Education, and Art, GCA. We are located in Oakland, but we serve the whole North California. We have clients from everywhere in the United States that we do legal services. So we are, like you say, we've been like kind of overwhelmed, like working like 24/7. GCA does everything. Like we have over 21 houses, that transitional housing for houses for immigrants. We also do legal representation, and then our focus was for African immigrant, but now we have more Latino immigrants also coming from everywhere, like Venezuela, Guatemala, El Salvador, and all that, So we helping a lot of immigrants. So like the colleague before me was saying, like the goal is like, how do we partner, together, like with not only doing this presentation, everything is speaking of. We already know that we are experiencing all these difficulties right now. So how do we partner? Like, if we need attorney to go to court with our clients, if, like you say, like we need to prepare somebody to court or is Spanish speaking, how do we partner together? Like, how do we link each other? So that's the most important. Like, I don't know what your organization is and where is it located. However, we love to partner together, like create coalition, like you say. So because we ask like I know what what is the organization that responding to the this one, the ILRC. Sorry, I had a cold. The ILRC is doing really good. They're doing webinars and all that stuff, and then they update a lot of community members. However, like we also have like Immigrant Rights Forum. We do Immigrant Know Your Rights. So when we invite them, they didn't show up. We send them message. So we talk to somebody to come and then be in our site to do like education, but they don't. So it's just like a matter of like what is missing is like working together as a coalition, like supporting each other needs, like when we need a lawyer, when we need something, when we need somebody to do like habeas corpus forms, when we need attorney to go with our clients, when there's emergency, like you say, there's a lot of clients just to kind of walking into our center, like they say, like next week I have a court. Can you go with me? Like, and we have to do the brief, we have to do like in the pleading, we have to do everything on the same week. We cannot say no because we are immigrant. We want to make sure this immigrant they don't get deported. So like you say, there's a lot of organizations working pro bono. We don't have no grants for legal services. We don't have no funding, no grants, nothing. We're just doing it all pro bono services. So we wanted to see like how we can connect and work together. At this time, we need Spanish-speaking attorney right ASAP. So we wanted to see if we can connect.
Yeah, and so I think you're hinting at exactly what, I was going to get to, and there's clearly a lot of barriers, right? The biggest one is the resources, and especially legal help. Unfortunately, the reality is that most people are not going to have access to an attorney because they're just not enough. And the ones that exist aren't ready to do low bono or pro bono work. So part of that is a very real barrier. And so what creative ways can we come up with together to address those issues? Unfortunately, if we're not attorneys, we can't pretend to be attorneys, right? So it's not like we're going to magically conjure an attorney, but that's when we want to fill those gaps. So for example, the pro se clinics that I mentioned, can you collaborate with an attorney to help not take on cases, but just supervise a clinic and just be like, okay, this application is good, we're good to go, right? So that they're not being burdened, which they feel that they can't take on more caseload, but that pro se model still allows an attorney to come and volunteer for one day. For example, we have it once a month. They come in, they just review the applications, and then that's it, right? It's very low burden for them. So that's where it's coming up with these creative solutions, but also being really realistic that when it comes to legal services specifically, most people are not going to get access to it because that is up to the attorneys to decide how they are going to approach this. If they're willing to expand their services to make them more, cost effective where people can access them, if they're willing to, add to their caseloads. So you address a lot of those barriers. It's just like knowing what resources are out there. So I think that brings us in really, carefully into what do we do? One of the things that is crucial for all of us in this moment is to recognize that the issues that are most pressing right now end up being time sensitive, right? You mentioned people come in, I have a court hearing next week. What do I do? I have, an ISAP appointment. What do I do? I lost my job and my rent is due next week. What do I do? Right? These are like really, really urgent issues. And because of how difficult of a moment this is for organizations as well, sometimes we feel overwhelmed, and so we step back and feel like we need to think and we need to plan. But that's one of the things I do want to stress is about flexibility and rapid adaptability. Sometimes something that I've noticed is that a lot of organizations, without being intentional about it, might create barriers to a lot of issues themselves. So I give the example about Court Watch. The first arrest happened on May 22nd. we launched a brand new program on May 23rd, the very next day, right? In recognition that this was time sensitive, and every day that we were not in that courthouse, there was going to be people arrested that would go missing, that no one would know about, no one could account for them or help them, right? And so
Right.
sitting with your organizations, with your teams, and discussing about what level of flexibility you can have to come up with the new plans and protocols as new issues arise is a major thing, right? Funding restrictions. We all know that, especially in the immigration field, there are so many restrictions to funding. Oh, you can only help immigrants that are applying for a U visa. You can only help those who have refugee status and are, being helped by the ORR, right? There's so many limitations. Oh, don't help someone if they're fully undocumented. And so, yes, we all have organizations with so many commitments. We have staff. We want to make sure we're supporting. We have all of our programs and the communities that we're helping. But maybe there's opportunity that every time we enter these spaces with grantors and these kinds of foundations, that we're pushing the limits and we're telling them, can you reconsider this condition on this grant of funding and how you want to restrict it to only this person and not that person? NorCal Resist has unfortunately had to do that often, where we refuse any grants with conditions that go against the work that we do. We have returned grantors their funding if they feel like they can restrict us from helping certain people. So maybe by us collectively doing that as organizations, we can start pushing the wheel of what these grantors and foundations are doing, so they stop limiting the kind of work we can do. Another thing is, we are all experiencing resource diminution, right? We are all, just since January, NorCal Resist has paid almost $75,000 in filing fees for individuals in 3 months, okay? We are all struggling as organizations, trying to figure out how to, get more resources. But what if we could come together in coalitions and pool resources together? So some orgs can't allocate any funding for filing fees. That happens a lot, right? But maybe we can. And so can you help with the rental assistance over there, right? How are we working together so that we plug into the things you can do and the things we can do and fill that gap where that of the things that aren't being met, right? Unfortunately, in the nonprofit field, we live in a capitalist society, so in most industries in this country and world, competition is used to pit organizations together against each other, and given the nonprofit industry and how it really functions to address scarcity already, competition is something that we're seeing in our field. How do I get this grant over you? And how do I make sure that I'm, in the spotlight so that I can get this and that? And it doesn't have to be that way. We do not have to feed into the system, right? And so how do we find that way to collaborate? Again, here's that example. Maybe you have more access to food resources, right? And so you can connect with someone who has a lot of connections with community members who are facing food insecurity, so they can offer the space and the families intakes, maybe if you need help with intakes, and you can help with food assistance, right? It's finding those key partners where they can meet one need and you can meet the other, and you come together and you are filling every gap possible. And then one of the things that is really important is spaces like these, because we have to discuss what we're seeing on the ground, right? Sometimes an organization starts seeing a trend before another, and then over time, the next organization starts experiencing a trend, and then the next. But if we had a better kind of outlet for communication, we were more connected in that way. As soon as a novel issue happens, we flag it, and we tell everyone, start looking up. We get together, we start brainstorming. What is the solution? Can we do a clinic? So for example, because of our Court Watch program, we found out about this new preterm mission strategy that ICE was using. And immediately that allowed us to reach out to other organizations, try to connect, like, what are we gonna do? Unfortunately, many legal organizations told us, this is just too new. We don't feel comfortable engaging yet or helping. And so what did we do? We said, okay, fine. And we figured it out, right? And we still launched it without support. But that is why that communication is key, so that if you find out something new that's happening, let's say one of your clients came to your office and told you that ICE, came by their neighborhood and they started wearing suits, and that's their new thing, right? Because people would open the door. We need to know that, because then we can start educating all of our networks and letting them know, hey, this is a new strategy we need to look out for. Let your folks know this, and this is what we're going to do. Let's put out informational campaigns. Let's do that. But it has to be collaborative, because as much as I wish NorCal Resist could talk to every impacted person in the world, that's not realistic for any organization. So you're going to be in contact with community members that we have no contact with, and vice versa. So the more that we can collaboratively put campaigns of information and resources out there, the more individuals we'll be able to touch. And that is why it is crucial that we look beyond the competition. We look beyond the scarcity mindset, and we try to do our best to come together, because that's the only way that, we can actually attack this moment, right? And it's also, the last thing I want to say is, like, we all have different strengths and weaknesses, presentation styles. NorCal Resist is a radical organization. We're not necessarily politically correct all the time. That's not our style. But maybe there are other organizations who are more focused on policy and on that kind of a messaging style. And so when the moment comes where that's the messaging style that's needed, being able to collaborate with that organization and launching that campaign in this style. But when the time comes and we need to go outside of ICE and we need to let them know that they need to stop kidnapping our people, maybe that's when NorCal Resist gets plugged in, right? But that's where that identification of our own strengths and weaknesses and coming together and making a plan of who is best for this kind of response, who's best for this kind of response, and where we can work together, that is crucial. And that is the only way we're going to make it in this moment. But I also want to hear from you all a little bit in this moment, because clearly we've all been met with barriers for collaboration. Have any of you, in your experiences with your organizations and other partner orgs, have any of you been able to overcome some of these barriers? And what suggestions and recommendations would you give us based on your experiences? I think it's really important to hear from everyone. So I'll give you a second. How have you overcome some of these barriers for collaboration? And how would you recommend that we be intentional about making sure that we take a more collaborative approach?
Thanks, Giselle. And while folks are thinking, I just want to remind you that you can either respond in the chat, or if you'd like to come off mute and share, please raise your hand and I can give you permission to come off mute.
And I can kick us off. Not only the other things that I mentioned, but honestly, in true NorCal Resist fashion, for us, something that has worked is just honesty. When we see larger organizations, or especially government agencies and actors, we are very, very forward about what deficiencies we have noticed in their action and where we think that they can improve. Because a lot of times there are organizations, there are government agencies with certain resources that they're just not tapping into. And sometimes they do need a level of accountability. And so trying to push that, right? Being in those meetings with grantors and different foundations and telling them, okay, you're trying to support with funding, but do you understand how many people you're excluding with these restrictions? Have you thought about why you have these restrictions in the first place? Challenging the norm, challenging people's behaviors and the way they operate in a respectful way, because the goal is to collaborate, but it also has to be on the basis of honesty, right? And understanding that we just want what's best for the community, and providing an alternative to, of how people are kind of approaching this. Does anyone have any other thoughts? I know we have some really experienced boards on the call. And I do want to emphasize as well that it all starts internally. So all of this NorCal Resist really started, I mean, as an organization, we started because we knew there were so many gaps in services. And so we were like, okay, what are the gaps? Okay, now that we've identified the gaps, how can we fill them, right? And really being clear in our purpose, being clear in our style, right? We understood that for us, the mission was our driver, not the way we were going to be perceived by anyone that's not the community. Because what is most important to us is how we are perceived by the community that we serve, and how we are building trust with that community. So if, other organizations, might not like our approach, again, our priority is to make sure that we are building trust with the community. And there was a question that mentioned, how do you access, folks who are really afraid right now? We go door to door. We have a very robust canvassing kind of schedule. Our goal is to canvass on every door in Sacramento, so hopefully you will see us soon. But we go door to door, and we try to build connections with our neighbors. We have conversations with them. We give them know your rights materials, information about the organization. We let them know, listen, here's your whistle kit. Ask them what trends are they seeing and need in their community, and trying to funnel them into the organization so we can identify different needs. Because outreach never ends, right? But our outreach styles can also speak to how intentional we are about building that trust and that relationship. And so we have found that canvassing in some of our most impacted communities has been a very, very powerful tool, so that our neighbors know, listen, we care. We are here in the rain. We are here in the heat, because we want to make sure that you know that the rapid response hotline exists. So if ICE is around your neighborhood, you know to call us, that you know how it works, that you know what kind of support we can offer, that you know that there are people in Sacramento, in Northern California, that care about you, right? And so partnering with other organizations to join us to canvass in other cities, that could be a really great first step if you're looking to do outreach, and making sure that people can start trusting you, and that they know that you care enough to spend your weekend going door to door trying to get them access and get them information about different resources. And really importantly, right now, the ICE Watch hotline is crucial, because we've had situations where individuals don't call until after someone is taken. But how powerful and more impactful could it have been if it was before, when the door was being knocked on, or they pulled up to the neighborhood, so that we can arrive and we can help with documentation, with triaging folks, etc. So to that question, being just really intentional about how you conduct outreach and build that trust with the community is everything during this time where people don't know who to trust. And especially when they're coming to us and, we're not always going to have the answers. We're more than likely not always going to have an attorney. But what are other alternatives and how else can we show solidarity with individuals? And that can be really powerful. Making sure. Okay. So, one thing that I want to mention is that we don't need to reinvent the wheel. For example, in 2017, when NorCal Resist started the brake light clinics, it was an idea that we saw that they were some immigrant advocates were doing out across the country. And we were like, oh my God, that's amazing. Okay, let's fix people's brake lights so that they're not getting stopped by law enforcement, especially, thankfully we're a sanctuary state in California, but in other states where law enforcement, can also funnel people into immigration enforcement, making sure that we're avoiding anything that can be a pretext for a stop. So we didn't have to, come up with that idea. Someone was doing it, and so we did it. And it's been one of our most successful clinics to date. Are you seeing new issues that are arising for, like, when we saw the pre-termits that DHS started using? We were shocked. It took us a second to digest, and it was like, okay, we started reaching out to the network. Are you starting to see this? What are you doing? What is this doing? Right? Ask. Because if you are the first, you're probably not going to be the last to experience or witness this new issue. Someone else will probably also come across it with someone else that they're serving. And so checking in with them and brainstorming together can be so powerful. And that's the power of the diversity of backgrounds that we all have, is that, sometimes I'll talk to a colleague and they have a whole other approach of how they would attack an issue in comparison to me. I would attack it this way. So sometimes we come in the middle and we have a powerful plan, right? And again, just come together. So we have a lot of health service organizations that are trying to really advance health initiatives. Maybe NorCal Resist can have a food distribution clinic, and you can collaborate with the vaccine clinic, right? And we'll have Know Your Rights resources. And there, together, we just created some incredible support. Food, basic resources, hygiene resources, vaccines, right? And some Know Your Rights whistle kits, Know Your Rights cards, etc. It doesn't always have to be complicated. It doesn't always have to take 3 months of planning for an event. We can get it done, because we have to remind each other that obviously the government is not here to help us and save us. Only we can do that together. And it's going to take us all to change the conditions that are currently being inflicted. And I do want to open it up to any questions, and comments that folks might have. My contact information will be shared. I think the recording is going to go out, right, Jasmine? So the recording and my contact, please feel free to reach out and we can schedule a time to talk. And I see that the chat is going to be open for everyone. So if everyone can share your org info and contact info. And I see, Payal, you have a hand up. You can.
Yeah, my name is actually Uday, and Payal, I'm representing SARS for cause on behalf of Payal. So I have a question. Since you were mentioning about doing door-to-door outreach and trying to provide help to the victims and people who are suffering immigration issues. Just want just wanted to know, like, since people are really traumatized, and they're always scared, uh, you know when like when will ICE will be uh, uh, knocking at their doors, or they're always under the apprehension. So is it a good and safe practice to actually make do door-to-door outreach and to people's home, and inform them about their rights and the resources available? Or is it better to to conduct a session at a particular place and probably uh, do a promotion and try to do an outreach from there?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. We feel really strongly about doing canvassing work. If you don't feel comfortable going to homes, you can go to like cultural shopping centers, like Asian markets, Latino grocery stores, things like that, and pass things out in the parking lot. We've done that as well. We have found a really positive response with door-to-door canvassing, because oftentimes when we try to do um, like events and have people come to a Know Your Rights session, people are afraid. I've been to Know Your Rights sessions where maybe only 10 people show up and they go, my friend didn't come because she thought that this was a trap, that ICE was going to be here, right? And so door to door is a good way to introduce yourself, your organization to people, give them that Know Your Rights card, and then your information hopefully is on your literature so that they can also research you ahead of time, right? And so that when you do a call, hey, we have this event, we have this, they've had a exposure to you already. And when we canvass, we do so very clearly, right? We have our NorCal Resist shirt, or, we're carrying our pamphlets. We leave the pamphlets at the door if they don't open. We encourage folks to leave the locked screen if they have one closed and just open the inside. It just being really amicable in creating those relationships with the community. We have found that is very successful. But of course, never pressuring anyone. So that they don't feel like, it's a trap, because a lot of folks are feeling that. But again, an alternative is going to businesses and pamphleting that way. Just be very clear. We always approach people with a smile so that they know our intentions. And we have found that it's a great way to build trust with the community, because, a lot of them say like, oh, wow, you're out here. Most people wouldn't care enough to go out here. Right. And I've actually, even with some organizations in the past, before I was with NorCal Resist, I've asked them to go into some of our most porous and impacted neighborhoods in Sacramento, and they refused because they didn't feel safe. So what do we do about that? If we're not willing to go and do the outreach that is necessary so that people know that we care, we're going to be faced with a lot of barriers. So there's a lot of considerations there. And you're going to do what's best for your organization, for your team, but it can look like different ways. Do we have any questions or comments? And I just want to say, this is a moment for us. I think more than, yes, this is a call for all of us to work collaboratively, right? Absolutely. So this is an external call, but it's more than anything before we think about, pointing our fingers at any organization. It's about looking internally to our organizations, our priorities, our approaches. Have we become too bureaucratic in our own procedures where it takes us 3 months before we schedule a KYR? Or can we do something in a week, right? We have to start being reflective internally and challenging the way that we operate. And NorCal Resist is constantly having to do that. We ask the community themselves to check us and if they're seeing deficiencies in the way that we are conducting ourselves, or in the programs that we're providing or not providing, to let us know, and not taking that feedback personally. But we do it with gratitude, because at the end of the day, we're not here to become an entrenched institution. NorCal Resist is here with the goal that We can help so many people, and we can better our world so that one day we don't have to exist anymore, because everyone will be taken care of by how we've built our world. And of course, it is very idealistic, but it is our goal. And so just knowing that we should not emulate the characteristics of the same institutions we are fighting against every single day. I take that to heart very seriously. It's almost a challenge for us as an organization to constantly just check in and remind ourselves what is our purpose, what is our mission, and why we should not create barriers to the work that needs to be done. We already have enough barriers put upon us by the government, by different institutions. We don't need to add to them to ourselves. So I am in solidarity with you all. I'm grateful for everything you all do and the communities that you are serving. Please do count on NorCal Resist. Reach out to us if you have any questions or any ideas for collaboration. Also, if you need any Know Your Rights literature, we have currently we have Know Your Rights cards that have the Migra Watch hotline on it, or the rapid response hotline. So if anyone thinks that ICE is near in the vicinity, in their neighborhood, at work, they give us a call. And we have them in Spanish, in Dari, Punjabi, and Hmong, and we're working on expanding those languages. But if you're in need of those cards, we can mail them to you, we can drop them off, so that everyone knows that in that scariest moment of ICE enforcement, they can give us a call, and we will send trained volunteers, observers, to arrive and support, to document and make sure that the detention gets into the rapid response network, and hopefully we can get a volunteer down to the ICE office. That is the same number that folks can call us for accompaniment. If they have a court hearing, an ICE or ISAP check-in, they can call us and request someone to accompany them. And again, it's not a lawyer, but that accompaniment, that person who goes with you can help people navigate the building. Is it on the fourth floor or the fifth floor courtroom? Where is ICE? Oh, you left your ICE check-in and they want you to go to ISAP. They go with you to ISAP, right? It's a big sense of support. And of course, more than anything, it's really critical for someone to be with you in the case of detention, so that you can be, triaged into support. So, that being said, if there are no other questions in the chat that I'm missing, I know we're a little bit early, Jasmine, so I don't know if you have anything to add.
Thank you, Giselle. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing your insights with our group today. I do have a couple announcements, but before I get to that, I just wanted to pause for a moment if there are any last minute questions or thoughts that you'd like to share with Giselle. And I do see folks putting their contact information in the chat. Thank you so much for doing that. And if there's any other comments, questions, or thoughts. All right, Giselle, I'm going to ask for you to stop sharing screen, please. And then, Irina, if you could share this last slide that we have. Thank you so much. So I did put a link in the chat for you all. If you could please take a few minutes to complete the survey about today's webinar. If you have any feedback for us, any comments or suggestions, that would be the place to put those. And then I also want to invite you all to our Communities of Practice meeting, which will take place in 2 weeks on April 15th. And I'm going to put the link in the chat to register for that. So for that meeting, we will be joined by the Center for Community Health and Development, and they will be sharing some tips and strategies around sustainability for organizations, especially right now, given everything that's happening at the federal level, thinking about how we can make sure that our programs are sustainable and continue to serve the communities in alternative ways that may be outside of federal funding. So again, the link to register for that meeting is in the chat. Otherwise, For more information and resources, please check out our website, cirh.phi.org. I'll put that in the chat as well. And as I mentioned, I will be emailing you all with the recording for today's webinar, as well as Giselle's contact information and the resources that were shared in the chat. And again, thank you all so much for joining us today in your busy schedules. It's great to hear from you.